hardly anybody called me Victoria. It was always Kustipami Dapiaki. So that was life-changing. Paul taking me up there is somewhere he knew I should know these people.
Yeah.
And then I was going down to Northern Cheyenne and going to sundances and powwows. And when I started going to Northern Cheyenne, I didn't know how to do beadwork. And my aunts taught me how to do beadwork. And so by the time I was 40, I had made my own first full buckskin dress. I didn't tan the hides, mind you, but I did all the beadwork. And then I started, before 1990, I was dancing in powwows. And so my life had shifted from this Western, cowboys, riding culture. And I never did any showing when I was young, to this whole new movie in my life. And I was in the movie of all these people in my family I always wanted to meet, and all they exposed me to, and how they took me in, and how they cared for me, and how they educated me. They're just, it was amazing. So I was complaining to Paul on one trip back from, the border, back from Alberta, saying, I just frustrated Paul. And he goes, well, I said, I'm frustrated about my work. And he was one of my best friends. He was like a brother. He says, well, what are you frustrated about? I said, I can't translate this new, I need to translate this new experience, this part of my life that I always wanted, but I wasn't able to have until now for one reason or another. I need to be able to put it in my work. And I want to be able to talk about those ceremonies and, be able to explain to people what I was seeing, being thrown back into history 350 years. So these things that were still living, alive, these bundles, these pipes, these ceremonies that never quit. And he says, well, and I quote, why don't you just make some Cheyenne shit, Indian shit? Like, okay, I'll go figure this one out. Very succinct, right?
Yes.
Well, yeah, why not? What's holding me back? So then you started seeing in my work, I do these Western belt buckles with, and next thing you see these little dancers in part of the buckle, or you'd see these symbols that were from the Cheyenne, traditional culture, or I'd be sneaking these things in, and, and a lot of people wouldn't really notice them. They just think, oh, it's just design. But then I got worse and worse. I went to
better,
I jumped the fence. I jumped the corral.
This is like early 1990 kind of thing.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I think I think I had my first show of my new styles of work about 1988. And Paul he lived in Sun Valley, and he put together a show for me, a private showing at his home. He had this big cocktail party, and he handled antique, he specialized in material culture, but mainly antique Indian culture. And he's one I got, who gave me those Curtis book plates of the Cheyenne Sundance. Oh, you should have these, he says. So my new story, my recreation of myself started happening, and it just really broke loose. And even though I was still doing some engraving, custom work, I was doing what was in my heart to make.
Right.
And since I wasn't a painter, how do I translate these stories from, my culture, the Cheyenne culture and the Blackfeet culture, and use them as design elements that are, these ideas are flooding into my head when I wake up in the morning. And then I started having shows in Sun Valley Center for the Arts, and my career took off again because of this new work I was doing, because it was yes, it was considered American Indian work in a way. Cheyennes don't have a history of being metal artists. They did some nickel work.
Yeah.
The Southern Cheyenne work in nickel, like Julius Caesar's work. And most of it was related to peyote ceremony designs, water bird designs. So I was in a kind of an anomaly because even, I had this bloodline and this enrollment, but I didn't grow up. I grew up in this whole other wild society that I just didn't have any boundaries. I didn't even have academic boundaries from some teacher. I was my own teacher. And so Paul saw that I got into shows in Sun Valley. We did the Sun Valley Center for the Arts and Humanity did these incredible shows that Paul curated that were a mix of antique American Indian arts and then contemporary. And I was I think I was about the only contemporary jeweler. And then later on through Paul, I met Joe Rivera, who owned Morningstar Gallery, had started Morningstar.
Right.
I think he started Crazy Crow Trading Post in Mission, South Dakota. I think he was the originator of that business. And so I got to know Joe and was coming down to Santa Fe to visit and go to workshops, like 3-day intensive workshops with people like Dwayne Moctema, who's I believe he's Pueblo jeweler, and I forget what.
He's part Hopi.
He's Hopi.
Yeah.
Yeah. Longtime friend. And then classes by a woman named, I think her name was Marilyn Nichols or Nicholson. She lived in Taos and she taught hinges and catches, and Phil Poirier, who was working with the Bonnie Doon, hydraulic presses when they first came out. And I used to always go to Crow Fair, and I had good friends there who ran the rodeo stock, the Aldens. And I finally found out about Santa Fe Indian Market wasn't really on my radar.
That was same time as Crow Market, right?
It was, I just went there to dance, and be with friends. So finally got my act together and realized that I could probably get my new work into the work that started in the 90s into Santa Fe Indian Market. So I applied, I think in late 97, got in the first year, 98. So 98 was my first year.
And you were showing at Morningstar this whole time?
Yes, I had been showing at Morningstar.
Yeah, I think that's probably where I saw your first work.
Actually. I think that's where we met, maybe through Joe.
Yeah.
And that was fun. It was such a fabulous gallery. Joe was wonderful mentor and brother, and he saved my life. He really did, because he said, you can get yourself off that ranch and you come to Santa Fe. He says, I won't let you fall down. I just won't let you fall. So I knew I wasn't going to starve to death. I could always get gas money. So he was very caring toward me, and we had a lot of fun. He was a great Latin dancer, and I loved to make him take me dancing until I'd wear him out. And
so did you move to Santa Fe at that time?
Was I what?
Did you move to Santa Fe at that
time?
No,
not until the fall of 99, 1999. You got into
Indian Market 98.
Okay. So the end of the first market, I think I won ribbons on a piece my first market, and I think in the first 10 years I was in market, I won best of division awards for non-traditional jewelry maybe 4 times in the first 10 years, which was fabulous to me. And then Joe Rivera had a friend who was a real estate agent, and he gave me one of those big multiple listing books. There was no real estate on the internet. There was no, none of that.
Yeah, none of those things.
No, none of that. So I started flipping through the pages, and I was down here for the 99 market on my own. And I found I knew just exactly what I wanted. I found a little condominium on the corner of Agua Fria, just west of St. Francis, 985 Agua Fria, and went and looked at it and went, I can get it. And so I ended up moving down fall of 1999, and Santa Fe is, still, so I lived here from 99 until the fall of 2016 and moved back to California basically to help my sister Alexis, who has been through some difficult health problems and is single and lives alone. And I was, okay, it's time for payback. Help her, because her getting me out of the house when I was 18, it was a lifesaver for me. It just was, even though I lived in basically in a middle class, well-educated neighborhood in Palo Alto. The kids I knew in high school were starting to do drugs, and they, were rolling cars, and I didn't have anything in common with them. They were, their parents were doctors and attorneys and from up across Palo Alto. And I had no conversation with them. And a lot of it was because of my older sister. All my friends were older. They were already into the careers, had graduated from college, they're artists, working artists, world travelers. So that's what I was exposed to. I was taken out of that teenage angst and went, okay, here's the real world. You have no boundaries.
Right.
Go do something.
Right.
So
it's an adult, basically.
And San Francisco was very safe at the time. You could walk home at 3 a.m. and nobody would bother you. It was a different era, a different city than it is now. And it was a pretty amazing time. And sometimes I'd cut school to go to a show opening at the De Young Museum or something. I was always in trouble with my teachers. A big flea market at the Hall of Flowers or some art opening.
Yeah, you were exploring art even then. When you had your free time, you were at museums and antique stores and
and it was amazing between the art and the music, whether it was so-called hippie art or fine art or the modern art museum or the De Young or whatever. There was always so much going on, and I had a lot of older friends that were working artists, and just the world was so big for me. I think about the young people who grow up in the county where I live now, in Tuolumne County, which is pretty depressed in a way. The education has gone to hell there, and I don't know if it was ever great. There's a couple places I pass by, sometimes it looked like they're out of the movie Deliverance. But to grow up there without and wanting to be just being an interested young person and wanting a way. Okay, you see a big, you're looking at pictures of the Field Museum in Chicago and look at all these things. How do you get out of Tuolumne County and get there if you're not a great student? I was not. I'm a really good student, but I wasn't. I didn't do well in school. I mean, I always got decent grades, but the fluorescent lights made me crazy. They gave me horrific headaches, but nobody diagnosed it. And so I just had to be outside, just.
You're hypersensitive is what you are.
Yeah, I still am.
Oh, I know. To probably sound, noise, smells.
Well, particularly fluorescent.
Yeah, no, me too. No, I have to do this podcast and we put on the fluorescence and I hate it. Yeah, I really don't. I can't stand fluorescence. All those things bother me too. So I can relate. Yeah.
Like they're the work of the devil.
Yeah. Yeah, they're the so that tells me a lot about.
I haven't let you ask me many questions, so I haven't you haven't put a word in edgewise.
I don't need to. I'm listening. I'm seeing the journey. I'll continue with the journey. So you're in Santa Fe now, and that comes in right around 2000. You moved to Santa Fe, somewhere right around there.
In the fall, September of 1999 was when I got my house.
And you stay there through 2016. And how did that change you or influence you? Because that's a completely different culture. It's Hispanic and it's also Native. It's Anglo too, but I mean, it's this tri-culture. The architecture is different. Your jewelry is taking off at this point, right? I mean, you're really being found and
It's been steady. I mean, it really took off when I started in Indian Market, and it's not much slowed down. And I used to do a lot more silver work. And then I start branching into silver and 14 karat gold, and I would do silver and 18 karat gold.
Mhm.
And now I work a lot in straight 18 karat and sometimes 22 karat, but I also do big hand constructed bracelets that are kind of a sterling frame base with a lot of 18 karat and gemstones on them. They give me a big palette to work on. So I love to do big butterflies or dragonflies with,
I always think of you as your butterflies for whatever
yeah,
reason. Is
I
that
call them
something?
bugs.
Yeah, bugs, yeah. Are
Bugs.
are you known for that? Is that, I mean, I always have kind of
I
thought,
think so. Yeah,
yeah.
that and some of my human forms. I
Oh
do
yeah.
often use human forms in my bolos, but I do I try to explain these stories that some are Cheyenne, some are Blackfeet, and throughout the in the cultural mythology, the Cheyenne mythology, there are always stories of an animal that will walk upright like a man, a
Mhm.
deer that walks upright like a man and marries a Cheyenne woman and takes her away. And then they have this union. And because of that union, the Cheyennes are allowed to hunt deer because the deer are family.
Hmm.
Family helps family. So, yeah, granted, you're killing the deer to eat it, but it's seen as the way of the deer is family. The deer gives itself to you to help you survive. It's the same with a buffalo or anything that is, any game that is killed to help keep you alive. And um, so I like to tell those stories in a visual way. And a
Mhm.
lot of the stories you learn if you're sitting in with family around a campfire during Sundance or at a powwow, or it's just somebody's house. There's still that love of gathering around a fire pit in the summertime, and kids are running all over the place, and the elders sit and talk about family history or tribal history, or what somebody's take is on this happening or that happening. And so you gather over the years all these stories together, and I love those. It's the animals that transition are very powerful within the Cheyenne culture and the Blackfeet culture. Say just like a weasel, and a weasel that in the summertime their coats are tan, in the wintertime they become ermine, and they're white, they blend into the snow. And those white ermine skins, you see them often on the really old and even the new Blackfeet straight up bonnets. The feathers stick straight up. They're not like Sioux style with the
Right.
big. They're straight up bonnets, and on the sides you'll see these white curly things. Those are all ermine, and they're special because the ermine is it can transform itself. It
Hmm.
shifts its shape.
Hmm.
So I'm fascinated by that mythology. And
Hmm.
it's with the Cheyenne, and it's also with the Blackfeet. And then sometimes I'll do a narrative about a family story on my own personal family. And then I'll turn it into perhaps a bolo tie, and it'll have a name glyph above its head, like the old ledger drawings. That's how I say the person's name. And then it'll behold, if it's a human form, often it's male, it'd be holding different artifacts that, oh, maybe it has a shield, or it has a pipe bag, or it has a jello mold, or whatever is, I feel like making it do,
Hmm.
or it's borrowed its wife's turnip digging stick and it's in trouble, and just that, since I don't paint, these are my miniature paintings. And then you can actually, if a man or woman puts these on, and this goes back to the beginning of man, you put this piece on and it empowers you, and you tell a story about it, even if it's a little pebble you find with a hole in it, and you put it on a string, and that's 3,000 years ago or 8,000 years ago. It's like, well, this is that great stone I found, and I feel lucky to have it. I am empowered by its beauty. It's special to me. Well, that is totally modern to me now. I mean, it's what I feel about my own work.
Mm.
And so people say, well, will you write the story down for me? I go, I have to remember it. It's your job to remember.
So you must get great gratitude when you're walking around Santa Fe, for instance, and see one of your pieces just randomly on somebody's neck or arm, because I'm sure it happens on a,
Yeah, it is.
occasionally.
Yeah. I've
What-
had one time where was I traveling? I was in a airport. Oh, I know. I was going to Washington, D.C. for the opening of the NMAI, the National Museum of the American Indian. You know, they invited all the Indians, right?
Right.
So they have a big parade down in front of the White House, and
Right.
the concourse, or
Right.
everybody shows up in their headdresses and moccasins, but I was in the airport either leaving or going, back to DC, and somebody stopped me. So you're Victoria, aren't you? Victoria Adams. I this huge airport. I'm kind of looking blank. They go, oh, look, I've got it is a joy
Right.
because
It has to be.
yeah, it is a joy because it's my children, my babies that I'm making and putting them out there. And yes, people pay for them, but they're still of me. They're part of me.
Mm-hmm.
And at one time I had a retail collection that I had manufactured in Albuquerque, and I wholesaled to Nordstrom's in the early 90s. And a lot of gift shops. And I'd go, I went to New York City with a girlfriend named Nancy Bodavinas and did a big presentation for a bunch of buyers at Nordstrom's. And it was an amazing experience to be there. And I did business with Nordstrom's for probably 7 or 8 years. But I was taken away from the bench. All I did was draw. And then oversee manufacturing and oversee in this and and sales reps, and I had 2 or 3 sales reps and packaging and presentation. And even back then the internet wasn't anything like it is now, and I did not have an Apple computer, which I adore. And it wore me out because all I did was go to gift stores who handled my work and communicate. I wanted to be back at my bench, building my own narrative. And when I dropped that work, that wholesale work, and was about the time I got into Indian Market. I mean, my life really changed. But I wanted to be able to build out of any material I wanted to build out of. I didn't want to be no restraint about, well, you've got to stay in this price point or that price point. And
Took the creativity out, I'm sure.
It does.
Yeah. And you're a creative person. That's what you are. That's who you are,
Yeah.
And you
still at it.
I can understand the Nordstroms. I mean, one, it's the money, and you end up chasing money sometimes, and you get it out there. But the reality is, I mean, you're a creative individual who needs to create and, not be pigeonholed. The fact that you put that piece in, Indian Market this year, testifies to that, because it's completely unique and different. You've only done 2 of them in your life, and yet you're still searching for that next sense of fulfillment, whatever it is. At least that's how I see it. I mean, maybe I'm off, but that's how I see it.
I love that adage, go big or get out of town.
You went big.
Not exactly Cheyenne, but it's like, I mean, when you go to a powwow, though, it's like you see men in fancy dance outfits or traditional dance outfits, and all the new materials and new ways to attach eagle feathers, and these big bustles. It's the same thing, go big, as you get noticed. But there will only be those 2 tripods. So it's that pair of sisters.
Yeah, that's it.
That'll be it.
Yeah.
Because I've said what I had to say, and I've housed this memorabilia, these mementos for me, from my family, and then from Sundance. And that's what they're for. They're little museums that are also interactive, because if the first one I built, the Carries the Fire, will be in the estate that it's in when that when the owner passes, that it will go to the Heard Indian Museum, which is where I would like it to be.
Hmm.
And this next one, I don't know. I would like to see them together.
Right.
I don't know where this next one will end up. And people say, well, how could you give away your grandmother's hammer? I didn't give it away. I made it, I gave it a life.
Hmm.
It's not just going to hang on some collector's wall who doesn't know anything about the provenance of it.
Right.
It's just this item. Okay, yeah, it belonged to a Southern Cheyenne woman. Maybe they'd remember her name or the family, maybe not. But spending a lot of time in museums and with people like Joe Rivera and Morningstar Gallery, whatever great gallery, great museum, I'm not of the thought that material culture is not important. And when I went to the opening of the NMAI, and Joe actually gave a lot of money to, a lot of people gave money to the building of that.
Me.
Yeah, good, thank you. But when I went there and I went upstairs, I was looking for the great displays of material culture, antique material culture, that I draw inspiration from. It was not there. They have, when I was there at the opening, there was next to no display area. Downstairs in the main foyer, there's the circular place where you could have meetings or dances, whatever. And there was a big display of Ben Knight Horse Campbell's jewelry upstairs. But other material culture, I think there was a exhibit on boarding school.
Mm-hmm.
I literally started crying because I wanted the material from the High Foundation to be someplace I could go see it.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine it's in, is it Hay or High Foundation? High Foundation?
Yeah, either way.
Is it in Silver Springs or Silver Lake? Where is it?
Well, it's in New York. The High Foundation, I think, is in New York City still.
Well, I think that they took most of the collection out of that museum and shifted into the Smithsonian.
Yeah, it is. It's part of the Smithsonian, but I think the collection is in New York because they still have the museum down in New York City.
Do they?
Yeah, they had the big Yazzie show in 2014.
I'll have to look it up where it is.
Yeah, they still do things in New York, both contemporary and
I think I went off your question subject matter, but
well, yeah, the subject matter was, I forgot too, actually, which I never do because I'm enjoying the story.
next.
I do have a question though. My question is that when Indian Market shut down for the pandemic, right? Because there was 1 year it was completely 2020, forget it. And even though I showed up that year just to see what was Santa Fe.
Well, it was there. It was.
Well, not 2020.
When was one that they asked? It's like COVID years are a blur.
Yeah.
But they pulled it off, but it was down to maybe 60%, 75% of its original size.
Yeah, they did it again in 2021, but in 2020, that's when it was off. There was no Indian Market. I was just curious how that affected you because it's such an important component of,
It was tough.
Yeah.
It was tough for me.
I would think.
And it was,
emotionally.
I'm glad I wasn't raising, 5 grandkids.
Yeah.
But it was hard for me. And the lack of being able to, you couldn't be around the people you wanted to be. I'd been trying to get back up to see my relatives on Northern Cheyenne, and they even had curfews on the res. They didn't want people going out. They were really tried to be careful about about COVID and their vaccinations. They were pretty forward thinking on it, but it was a hardship for everybody. And I just, because of it, I couldn't go back and see them. And I dare not take a bug that I brought from, a super spreader occasion, giant gallery openings in Santa Fe.
Right.
I'd be killed.
Yeah, no. I mean, the last show was the Herd, actually, I think in 2020. They did the show and everything kind of closed down.
Yeah, it was pretty shocking. But luckily Herd never shut down, and SWAIA survived, and everybody kind of limped along and hoping for the sunrise, and
right
finally came.
Yes. And how was this year for you?
It was remarkable. Well,
Nice.
one, it was a great feather in my bonnet to win a new bested division for something totally different from anything that I've ever created before, except its sister.
Right.
And I the new director, Jamie, is it Schultz? The women who are in the offices now, who are the new backbone of SWAIA, they seem to be everybody's in the office who's on the forefront now. I think they did a remarkable job. They worked so hard. It was more organized than I have seen it in years.
Yeah.
I think not since Bruce Bernstein was there.
Yeah. Jamie's good. She's really good.
She's remarkable. And all the new website work and all these, just amazing, and letters to artists, and they have a new forum coming up that I think is this next weekend. And I was hoping it would be in person, but I think it's a big Zoom meeting forum for artists to discuss the market and feedback. And my main contact in the office prior to Jamie being there was Mona Perea, who's been director of artist services, and she kind of came up through the ranks. She didn't really want the job. She knew how much work it was. This was a few years ago, and she's done a great job. She's always available to talk to. It makes a big difference for people who are not always on the forefront of computer savviness like me.
Yeah,
I'm like flint and steel.
Yeah, it's a problem for all artists, native or not,
I don't know, a lot of ones that are young, a little bit like 10 years younger than me, 20 years, they're like,
oh yeah,
they know it like the back of their hand, Me, I'm like, I just want to go make my jewelry and go ride my horse. That's
in that order. Do you do it in that order?
Well, actually, for instance, I started doing a little bit of showing a couple of years ago, and I have a really nice buckskin gelding named Shiner, and he was 3 when I got him, and he wasn't real well broke. He was broke, but not finished at all finished. So I started riding with a reining trainer, reining discipline named Jason Richards up at Clements, and he changed my life. He's about 51, and I could stay on a horse and I could move cattle up and down about anything, and I could go on about any kind of trail, but I had no academics. And when I started riding with him, I went, oh my gosh, I can't ride. He'd like, tell me, go out and ride. Okay, big, clean, big, fast circle, come down, do a slow circle, come across, do a fly and lead change. Oh, couldn't hold my horse straight up, couldn't sit down well. My hands are all over the place. So I've been working on it, because I can't wait till I can't let it go for another 5 years and have I couldn't afford when COVID hit, the horse prices like tripled.
Yes.
And what you could get a really good registered horse had been shown a bit for maybe $10,000 or $12,000. That price went to $35,000. I went, I'm out.
Yeah.
I'm way out. I got house repairs, so I ended up getting this little gelding that because I had raised all my horses for years because of living in Montana, and I brought 3 of them with me to Santa Fe, and they aged out. The last one passed away at 28, and so I ended up getting this little gelding a few years ago, and was actually 2 years ago. Well, he's not real little. He's 15 hands, and he keeps growing. And I think I injured an Achilles tendon on my left side trying to mount from the ground. I hyperextended my tendon.
Right.
So I'm not used to being slowed up. So me and Gimpy don't get along.
Yeah. That's a bad one. You don't want to pop the Achilles.
Yeah. So I had to take a break. And then I got him back from the trainer, started riding. I took him to my trainer for a month, trying to heal up. And then I got him back on the 3rd of July. And I have a small arena at home on our place or my place. And he has a pony sidekick, a little Welsh pony, keeps him company. But I thought, I'm just going to I had a ton of work to do. I had to finish that sculpture, get ready for Indian Market, drive out here, stay for a month, etc. I had lots to do, but I just better get determined here. I can't be making excuses about not riding. I got this great horse who's been getting well trained. So I'd feed him at 6, try to get him saddled between 7 and 8, depending on how hot the day was going to be. Get him saddled up, take him down the arena, start walking him. You ride him for anywhere for 30 minutes to an hour, usually about 45 minutes. Just go and put him through his paces, get him really well worked. It wasn't big enough to arena really get a big sweat on him, but he got worked. So I did it from every single day. I never missed a day from July 3rd to August 9th. Wow, what a great experiment. I mean, there are a lot of people who do that all the time, but I had my work to do.
Right.
Then I got this darling horse, standing in the stall going, where is she?
Right, I bet.
I'm done with breakfast. So it was really interesting, and it changed so much because of the gathering of information I've had the last few years, riding with his reining trainer and cutting trainers and doing a little bit of showing. I knew a lot more what I was about with this horse. And so we just rode every morning, and he'd get was really hot. He'd get his little shower and go back and get his lunch, or, he was happy, but it changed us so much as the rider horse communication. And I ride Western style, and he just blossomed. I could drop his lead rope in front of the house out by his horse trailer where I keep my saddle, tell him stand. I'd go in the house, make a cup of tea, and I'd look out the door. He'd be going, stand there watching the house. Never moved a foot. Never moved. I went, that took about 27 days of just stand.
Yeah.
They're like dogs, Cheyenne's calling, like elk dogs.
Yeah, kind of, actually. So do you do much jewelry that is horse equine related? It seems like it would be a natural.
Well, I did before I went all Indian on myself, went all Cheyenne on myself. And it's always things, sometimes things just call you back. And, the move to California, it was shocking in the way I hadn't lived there. I hadn't been there in 35 years. I'd never been back. And where I moved was in the gold country on the western slope of the Sierras. And when I was a kid, we used to go up there and camp, and my dad would fly fish or hunt all the time. So that was a little bit of a second home up there, really familiar, those foothills of the Sierras. So when I moved back there, I said, well, the only way I'm going to move back is I got property enough for a barn and an arena and a big studio. And that's what holds me there, keeps me pretty happy. What was the question?
Yeah, well, the question was do you do the horse work?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So in the fall, when I engraved, I was the only woman I knew who engraved. No, there were just no other women in the early 80s, mid 80s that were engraving that I knew of. Diane Scalise from, I think she's in Wyoming or Colorado, who's a top engraver now, technically incredible. I just saw some of her work in the Cowgirl Hall of Fame in Fort Worth. She teaches at the GRS Center in Emporia, Kansas. And also a longtime friend of mine named Jeremiah Watt teaches there. And Jeremiah teaches bright cut engraving. And he's from Canada. He's also a saddle maker and makes all kinds of hardware, really interesting man. And his cousin, Bill Stewart, helped me with a tripod on those two pieces because he does blacksmith work. So I was getting itchy again about engraving, because I was back in California with all these reiners and cutters and, National Rein cow horse people and Versatility ranch horse. And I'm going, I'm getting the itch to engrave again. So in the fall of 21, I went to school for a week at the GRS Center in Emporia and took a class from Jeremiah. And usually it's 2 years waiting list. I managed to get into a class, and I bought a Graver Mock machine that because I used to engrave by hand. I had no power assist engraving. It was just my arm.
Mm.
And so I went back, I went, well, I don't want to work as hard. I want to work smarter. So I went back to learn how to engrave with one of these power assist machines, and they're lovely. And GRS Glendo, they produce them, a couple different versions of them. You have to learn how to engrave. And it really helped me that I already knew how to engrave.
Right.
I understood all the mechanics of it. And it was just an amazing feeling to be able to set a graver in the metal and just guide
Right.
the graver rather than having to shove your whole upper body into it to cut a piece of metal out. When Dan Murray, who first was teaching me how to engrave, boy, he'd grab a couple shots of whiskey and he'd get on a buckle and he'd just slam his graver in there and he'd like whap it out on the other side.
So will you take that new knowledge and start using engraving and maybe do some things like horse related things?
Yeah, more, Western, I call it, basically Victorian florid ornament or florid Victorian ornament goes west.
We've covered a lot. Is there anything we haven't covered that you want to make sure that we talk about?
I think we've done the full gamut. Don't ask me another question because I've already been on 2 hours.
And about 2 hours.
I thought you were cutting me off at an hour.
Yeah, no, I don't cut you off. I never cut. I just let the story unfold however it unfolds, right? So, and I know we're missing some things that we haven't got over. But there's probably a reason we're missing them too.
Yeah, lots of adventure stories. Yeah, it's like, I'm looking over here thinking there's a man coming with one of those hooks.
Yeah, to pull you out. Where's your next event that people could see you? Is it going to be, is it the Herd?
I'll be at the Herd in March, the first weekend of March for the Herd Indian Market. But I will be showing in the collector's gallery inside the museum on the bottom floor. So I've been invited to show there. I will enter that new sculpture, the Sundance on Muddy Creek. And I can, once it's been in the competition, no matter what it does, and I can shift it into the gallery, the collector's gallery at the museum. And that'll be lovely. The crew, the staff at that museum, who I've been dealing with for many years, are just so remarkable. I'm treated so well.
Yeah, it's a great museum.
Yeah, lovely people. Love all they're doing. So that'll be my next event, the first weekend of March.
All right.
I need to go home and start engraving and go ride my horse.
Yeah, when are you going to leave Santa Fe?
Probably toward the end of the month. I've been after one of the connections I have here in town is a man who does computer work, models of things, and so I can take him a design, and he'll configure the design in a vector file or whatever they're called, so he can carve it out for me in his the computerized wax carver. So I can have a wax original of what I'm after. I'm not much of a wax carver, and if I want something cast, it has to be that way. And I've got projects going with him because I also do evening bags.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Those are beautiful. I forgot to talk about those. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, they're killer.
So for hinges and catching mechanisms, especially the catches, I want to upgrade the catches. And so I'm working with this gentleman to do models for me that I will be cast in nickel or white jeweler's bronze is the other thing and it's part of the purse that you don't see on the outside. It's just, the catch mechanism, because I like them push button, click, open really nice.
Right.
So
you don't do that many bags, right? How many bags do you do in a year?
I kind of go in phases of, I need to have some new designs, help with some new designs. I have the drawings, the concepts and the drawings, and a lot of the first hard-sided purses I did were all one-off. Hand did all the catches, the hinges.
Right.
Now I have the parts cast because I can get really great profiles. All the hardware is cast in sterling silver. And then often I'll add high-end stones, sapphires, or whatever I have in mind to do everything from fossilized ammonites to high-end stones to decorate them. And my favorite is my alligator bags. They're done with caiman leather. It's farm-raised caiman from South America. I think comes from Colombia. And then often it is, my main supplier is in El Paso, and they do the tanning in El Paso, and they will even do custom colors. And a wonderful client of mine named Ellen from New York had last year for Indian Market, she ordered one that was in emerald green caiman with alligator, accoutrements on it. Just was that color. They custom colored it for me, for Ellen.
Right.
And it's just mouth watering. It's so much, it's so beautiful, but they're pretty labor intensive.
Yeah, they're
and,
beautiful bags.
And it's a process because I have an acquaintance that does a pulls plastic and ABS plastic. He does, auto parts and all kinds of weird things. And so he does the bodies, the shells, that hinge open this way, hard-sided shells. Then I have a friend who's a really good leather worker who does the coverings for me, because my leather work, as far as it has to be so precise. And he has these French skiving machines that are as big as a kitchen table. So when he does the edges that have to be folded under, they're just paper thin, so they can be folded, and all these parts attached to the purse. Then he sends them back to me, and then I do all the mounting of all the hardware and the clasp and the straps, and then I do the interiors are made out of Dupioni silk, and they have gathered pockets, and every purse comes with a special Indian head penny.
Yeah,
that was saying part of the sculptures that, iron, glass, mother of pearl, whatever. I also incorporated a lot of antique American Indian head pennies. Most of them are struck before 1900. And I have a whole narrative that I need to produce talking about those, because those pennies, if you think about the years they were struck and American Indian history, the years they were struck.
Yeah, bad.
And the hands they passed over. And then the fact that the US government for years had a war against American Indians, wanted to wipe them out, yet they put their heads, the guy, a chief on a penny.
Yeah, and on the nickel too. We had the nickel.
Yeah, Buffalo.
Yeah.
But so that's a whole other subject matter. It's a little bit of a political statement, but it's like, where do I start that narrative? I wanted just to research, these certain old ones that I had that, make up part of the structure that holds the glass containers, is to research the dates on those and find out what treaties were made, what treaties were broken. I mean, just with the Cheyenne, and these certain.
Your dad was born in 1909, right? That was the first year of the Lincoln head penny. They quit the Indian head the year before.
Oh, so not. Do you know when they were first struck?
I don't. I can't remember.
I'm gonna look that up.
I don't remember for sure. 1860s maybe, but I know 1909.
Earliest one I found was like 1876. That's 74 right in there in my collection.
Yep, but the same year your dad was born, they quit doing it.
I'll remember that one.
Yeah, I know, right? Isn't that interesting? The same year that Geronimo died, by the way.
That the year before my father was born, I think it was 1900, right before he was born, that man, his name, they called him Ishi, I-S-H-I.
Yeah, Ishi.
He was brought into a ranch. He wandered into a ranch on the skirts of Oroville, starved down.
Right.
The ranchers didn't know what to do with him. He spoke no English.
Right.
And they brought him in. They put him in jail in Oroville because they didn't know where else to put him.
Right.
They just kept him there and fed him. And then he ended up eventually in Berkeley. That was but my father remembered stories about Ishi when he was a young child, because it wasn't that long before he was born. And what a heartbreaking story that is.
Everything from his skeleton ending up in I think the Smithsonian at one point.
Did they? Did
Yeah.
they? Oh,
Mhm.
Lord. I
That
better
was
look it up.
that was repatriated, but yes, I think that's the story of it. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
So
So
kind of a short step back to the Edward Sheriff Curtis work.
yeah.
I was just loaned a book. I think I might have read it a long time ago, and it was written by Timothy Egan. It's
Yeah.
called Short Nights of the Shadowcatcher.
Mhm.
That's a good book.
Yeah. There's a new book coming out by Larry Peterson that's on Curtis as well. That'll be out in January.
What's it called?
I don't have
Oh,
it
no.
in front of me. I mean, it's still at the editors, I guess, or at the
Okay.
press. Yeah, but it's a new book, and it's going to
About Curtis.
all about Curtis. Yep.
Mm.
Yep. And it will
Okay.
be groundbreaking, is my understanding.
Do you ever well, it looks like you've got a piece of Curtis right behind you in a brown frame. Is that Curtis?
Oh, no, that's a Hopi. That's not a Curtis. It's a piece of Hopi from unknown photographer. But I do have Curtis's. Yeah, I do. And then those are TC Cannons behind me as well.
You always have lots of good goodies behind you.
Yeah, I love TC Cannon.
Well, I will be a more loyal
Follower.
yeah. Now that I know what's going on.
We should ask one more question since you knew Teal Blake as a young man. What was he like as a young kid?
Oh, it was a terror.
Yeah.
A wild Jewish Indian kid,
I bet. He's a real cowboy. Yeah.
Yeah, he was a cute, he's right. I remember all the animals, and his mom, Tona, she had these little peach face lovebirds that they had full reign of the house. She'd open their door, and I know I live right next door.
Right.
And so she let the lovebirds out, and Teal would be off at school, and I might be over for coffee or something. And she always had black labs, and this one at the time, his name was Boogie. And he'd be laying down, kind of sleep, and those little lovebirds would climb down their rope, and they'd come across the floor, and they kind of look at each other, and they'd like one of them black over bite his nose. And the birds were like this tall.
Yeah, I know.
And Boogie would go off in terror, just because he got his nose bit. The animals in that house were always interesting because there was no dividing line between human and animal. It was just all blended.
I love that.
Yeah. So he was a healthy boy. Couldn't, I remember him just bright, intelligent, sometimes you couldn't control him, but that he was healthy as a boy that way. Most of them are like that. So it was interesting being around him. I remember one time my mother came from California to visit me, and Teal was about 4 maybe, and a little mischief maker. And Tona and I were gone somewhere, and my mother said, "Oh, I'll watch Teal." So she's in the kitchen cooking, and he was getting in trouble, and she tried to make him behave, and he snuck up behind her and had a glass of water, and she had elastic top pants on, and he pulled the pants back and poured the water and ran off. She was so mad and a hornet.
Yeah, there's my good Teal story. That's the one I wanted to end the podcast on.
So yeah, it was fun. Like I said, I'd met Tona when I was 23, so we go way back. And I just saw her last weekend. We dined together in Dallas. We stayed at a girlfriend's house, and the girlfriend's building a new house. It's a really interesting project. And I hadn't seen Tona in probably, I don't know, 10 years or something. And yeah, about 10 years. And it was really a lot of fun to catch up. And the girls, that's all we did was, talk. We went over to another friend's house who had, on 1 acre in Dallas in Highland Park, 4 horses, an arena, and about 80 chickens, and a couple runner ducks. And we made friends with a new little chicken named Peanut. So that was between the Eamon Carter and Peanut, I was really good. Had a great time.
Did you get to see the Nevelson show that was at the Eamon Carter?
Yes.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I encourage
It was really good show. And then there were they had several Richard Avedon full-size pieces.
Yeah, it's all throughout the
Mhm.
exhibit space.
And I met him and his assistant. Yeah, I think he had 3 assistants with him, but his main photography assistant, Laura, in Augusta, in I think 1982, and he was working on the Great American West book. And Teal was a kid, and he was staying at Buckentona's house, and we were gone for something, and so they had the run of the house, and he was snagging people out of the crowds at the Augusta Rodeo, which was just 2 blocks away.
Right. Did he?
So and I've not seen his pieces in big format, only in books. So
yeah, they're impressive, aren't they?
Yeah, and he was such an incredible man.
Yes.
Lovely to be around.
Yes. Did he ever do a photograph of you?
No, he was too busy over at the rodeo.
Yeah, yeah, and he probably wanted harder figures, a hard light.
Yeah. Later on, he would have liked me.
Yeah, now he would love you.
He might like me now. Yeah.
All right. Well, Victoria, thank you so much for spending the time. And this looks like it'll be a 2-part podcast. So
yeah, I am long-winded. Don't ask me questions.
no, that's good. You have a 2-part podcast, and okay. I really appreciate you sharing your story. And
it was delightful to run into you at the big luncheon for SWAIA. Great circumstances, and thank you so much for your invitation and your tolerance.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. I've always wanted to do. You've been on my list to do a podcast with, so I've always been a fan of your jewelry and your purses and your handbags, I should say, and so it was fun to get to spend time with you. When I see you, it's always at Indian Market, and there's always like a crowd around you, so it's not like I get to talk to you, and I don't want to really interrupt too much because you're so busy, and it's when you make money, and it's like, I don't want to infringe on that unless I'm spending money. So,
well, I think I need to come visit this winter. And I asked Patrick this morning if he knew Bill and Pauline Rhodes.
Mm-hmm.
Pauline's British, she's from York, and you might remember them if you saw them. Anyways, they live in town. They had for a long time an appraisal company called American Eagle Appraisers, or American Eagle Antiques, or they did appraisal work.
Yeah. Well, come down, come see us.
And so I'm sure I need more goodies from Jim's show. So
yeah, well, that's in February, as you know, and that's first week in
February. Is it the first week of February?
First week in February, second week in February.
It's been hard since I've been at the herd because I'm always so busy working right then. And
well, rent a house for a month and come to Tucson in February when it's like,
stay on.
Yeah, stay on.
Okay. So, all right. You're on. You better lock the door.
Oh yeah, no, I'll open them gladly. I'm sure there's lots of things here you'll like. We could do some trading for one of those handbags.
Hey.
We'll talk handbags. So yeah, they're beautiful.
Thank you.
All right, Victoria.
We'll talk to you soon.
All right, thank you.
Okay, tell Patrick I said thank you.
I will.